Hello, scholars. I'm excited to learn about today a topic that some of you might already know a lot about. We're going to learn about endangered species and the causes or factors that lead a living thing to be considered endangered. But before we take a look at the problems that lead these species or living things to become endangered or extinct, let's first review what a healthy ecosystem looks like. So, in the last lesson, you learned or reviewed an important word, biodiversity. Pause the video now and challenge yourself to write down a definition in your own words of what this word means, biodiversity. Do that now. Okay, so what is biodiversity? And what does it have to do with a healthy ecosystem? If you wrote down that biodiversity is a wide variety of living things living in the same environment, kiss your brain. So, biodiversity, how does it show us that an ecosystem is healthy? Well, if there's a wide variety of living things in an ecosystem in the same place, then living things there will be much better prepared to respond to changes in the environment. So think about it like this. If there was only one type of plant living in a certain environment and one type of animal that only ate that plant, the slightest change would probably end up wiping out the whole food chain. If it got a little too cold for that plant to survive, then all the plants would die, and therefore that animal that depends on that plant for food would also die, and so on up the food chain. But if there's a wide variety of living things in an area, there's always going to be some living things that are better able to adapt or respond to those changes, keeping that ecosystem healthy and thriving. Okay, so let's talk about what can go wrong. We talked about a healthy ecosystem, but obviously there are problems that lead to some species becoming endangered or extinct. So one thing that causes problems for all kinds of plants and animals all over the world is habitat loss. When humans come along and they decide they want to, for example, build a shopping mall, we will come and cut down all the trees, we'll bulldoze to flatten the land, pour concrete, and otherwise change the environment to develop it. So what this does for the native plants and animals that live there, it ruins their home, so they don't have a habitat or place to live. When we destroy natural habitats like this, or by polluting the environment, land, air, and water pollution, we destroy the place that they depend on to live and survive. Also, through overfishing, overhunting, poaching, for example, when people want some resource that a living thing provides, like the tusks of elephants or rhinos, that ivory, also hides of animals like tigers. When humans over harvest those living things to get something from them, that also causes a sharp decline in their population. Last week we talked a lot about invasive species. So take a minute, pause the video. How do you think invasive species might lead other living things to become endangered? So you might have said correctly that invasive species coming in that take over quickly and take a lot of the resources would lead other living things to go endangered or extinct by taking all of their resources. So if one invasive species comes in that is better able to eat all of the food that other living things depend on, they're clearly going to outcompete those things and cause their numbers to go down and, worst case scenario, never recover. So we're going to talk about what exactly do we mean when we say endangered species. An endangered species is categorized in different levels depending on how many are left in the wild. So if that number gets really low, then environmental scientists decide which category that species is going to be put in so that we can learn how to protect and hopefully allow that species to recover. So if there are few enough species left in the wild, few enough numbers of a species left in the wild for it to be facing a high risk of extinction, we call that species vulnerable. That's what environmental scientists decide, okay, this is a vulnerable species. We need to start taking some steps to make sure to protect this plant or animal or other living thing. If those numbers of that living thing become low enough for it to be at a very high risk of extinction, we call it endangered. So there are a number of endangered species. I'm going to give you a list here shortly. And if that number becomes so low of living things left in the wild that there's an extremely high risk that that living thing is going to become extinct in the wild, we call it critically endangered. All right, so what are you going to do for this assignment? Well, you're going to choose one of these endangered species, not just from this list, but from a longer list that I'll provide for you. Whichever one you want to choose, you're going to study that one species. So you're going to do a little research on your species. I always start out by just typing into Google Classroom the name of my species. For example, if I wanted to do the Cross River gorilla, I'm going to type that into Google, find some articles that tell me all about that species. If I want more specific information, like what is the habitat, natural habitat of this living thing, I'm going to say, okay, Cross River gorilla natural habitat in Google, and that way I can find more specific resources to help me on my report. So I'm gonna find out, okay, where does this living thing normally live? What is its habitat usually like? What happened to it? Why did the number start decreasing? Was it because of habitat loss? Was it because of overhunting? So you're gonna say, what happened to your living thing to cause it to go into the endangered species category? And also, importantly, what are we going to do now to help that species? How are we going to protect the species, and how are we going to allow it to bounce back in the wild? So before I show you on Google Classroom exactly how to get started on your report, let's read together the criteria for success. In order to show excellence on this report, we're going to first describe the native habitat where your species lives. So I'm going to tell, if I was going to talk about the sea turtle, not just it lives in the ocean, but where is its normal habitat range? Does it live in the Pacific Ocean? I'm going to say specifically, is it the green sea turtle? Is it the leatherback sea turtle? So I'm going to say exactly what my species is. I'm going to describe it. Is it a reptile? Is it a mammal? Tell me a little bit about that species. Where does it usually live? Its natural habitat or native habitat. Then I'm going to talk about what causes led that species to become endangered. So identify the causes that led your species to become endangered. In this case of the sea turtle, the green sea turtle or the leatherback sea turtle, a lot of times I know they were caught in fishing nets, and because they need to breathe air, oxygen, they would get trapped underwater, tangled in the fishing nets, and die that way. And that's a way that led their numbers to get low enough to be considered endangered. Then you're going to provide an action plan for how your species made a full comeback into the wild, and include at least one picture of your species. So I'm going to take you to the actual Google Classroom assignment so you can get started right away on your report. If you go to your Google Classroom, even at the very top, make sure you're on classwork. You're going to scroll down to science. And here's the actual assignment, Endangered Species Report. So let's view that. Now you'll see that you have two resources. One is an article that says, how does a species become endangered? This will be a helpful resource to just get an idea if this applies to your species. how these numbers got so low. This list of endangered species is where you can choose. Now, if you, let's see if I can move this a little bit. Okay. If you just click on one of these species, you'll notice it is directly going to link you to a page that tells you all about that species. So once you choose your species, you already have a first resource of how to do your research or where to look for that information. Now, after I choose my species, I'm going to do my research, make sure I know where it lives, describe the habitat, what happened to it, and an action plan. Where I'm gonna write that is on this Google Doc here, Endangered Species Report. I've already outlined some of those things that we need to include. So you should be able to look at this report and see, okay, here's where I need to describe the native habitat and my endangered species. Do that there. Here's where I'm gonna write how it became endangered. So overfishing was a major cause of the decline in population of the leatherback sea turtle. So you're going to fill in that information there, and finally your action plan. This is the action plan you can write in steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 if that is easier for you to just show how are we going to protect this species and allow it to bounce back in the wild. So I'm super excited to see. Remember, I want you to include at least one picture. You could do that at the top. You could do that down here at the description part. But I'm excited to see all about your endangered species and read all about them. So remember, simple instructions. Choose your species. Research your species. And third, finally, report your species about where its native habitat is, how it became endangered, and how we can help bring it back. So good luck. If you have any questions, please reach out and I will do my best to help you.